Chiefs news, analysis, and opinion every day.
The City Chiefs did lose their opening week game versus the Chargers, and while no one looked particularly good, things weren't all bad for the Kansas City Chiefs, and there were definitely some building blocks that this team can use moving forward, some coachable moments. But one thing that stood out as a positive to me, that I think probably stood out as a positive to all of you as well, the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line looked much improved versus last season. Yes, there were breakdowns. Yes, there was a bad snap. Yeah, there were a few times where Mahomes was under some extraordinary pressure, but this was not the same team that took the field versus the Eagles in the Super Bowl, at least not along that offensive line. And in fact, the PFF had the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line ranked 13th in the NFL after week one, up 7 spots from where they had been prior to the week. And I think heading into this season, if anyone had told any of us that the Chiefs would have the 13th ranked offensive line in the NFL, we would have been okay with that after last season. PFF goes on to say, Kansas City's revamped offensive line got off to a good start in week one. The unit stayed clean in the sack department and surrendered only 10 pressures on 46 pass plays, leading to an 89.1 PFF pass blocking efficiency rating, which tied for 10th best in week one. That is a full stop statement. That is what it is that we would have been looking for heading into this season, because the Kansas City Chiefs have the number one player in all of football, regardless of how it's voted on by his peers, Patrick Mahomes, throwing the football. So who cares what happens in the running game, quite frankly? The article goes on to state, however, the new pieces on the left side proved to be weak points. Well, rookie tackle Josh Simmons and second-year left guard Kingsley Suamataia combined to surrender 7 of the 10 pressures against the Chargers. Well, we'll get into something in a moment that is a little bit comforting for that. The best player they have listed here, Creed Humphrey. Humphrey was the lone Kansas City offensive lineman to not allow a single pressure in week one. However, an errant snap leading to a fumble resulted in his lower PFF pass blocking grade. Here is the performance that Creed Humphrey had: a 68.5 overall, a 62.6 pass blocking grade, and a 72.0 run blocking grade. That is a solid performance for an offensive lineman there, and that's what we would expect from Creed Humphrey. We have an elite score here from Trey Smith, had a 58.7 overall grade, but an 85.4 pass blocking grade, which again, keeping Mahomes clean is exactly what you would want to see. However, confoundingly, a 40.5 run blocking grade. Now, I'm not going to fault that too much on Trey Smith. There's a lot of things that can happen in a one-game situation that leads to a lower score. You would want to see this improved over the course of a season. You want to see this improved very much next week heading into the Eagles game. But a one-game performance grading out at 40.5, who knows how correct PFF is on this grade. But that 85.4 pass blocking grade is a great thing to see. Now, you want to see something funny? Here's Kingsley Suamataia's scores. A 59.9 overall grade, a 56.9 pass blocking grade, and a 59.5 run blocking grade. Now, while I think any of us would have signed up for this heading into the season, one thing that is interesting to see, that overall grade there of 59.9, 1.2 points higher than Trey Smith's overall grade. This side of things really affected the overall grading there, the 40.5 run blocking grade for Trey versus the 59.5 pass blocking grade. It is hard to say how that is weighted out, with that pass blocking grade being 85 versus 56 for Kingsley, especially when there were more pass blocking attempts than there were run blocking attempts But I'm going to be real honest with you. I don't know everything that goes into these grades from PFF. Still, heading into this season, to see Kingsley Suamataia with a 59.9 overall grade, I think we would have all taken it, especially against a defense like the Chargers, especially in week one. So we are, I think, expecting these grades to come up for Kingsley as the season goes on, as he adjusts to playing that offensive guard position and as he gets used to the players on each side of him, Creed Humphrey and Josh Simmons on the tackle spot. But also, there will be teams with defenses lesser than the Chargers have. Now, this is the good news. The bad news for the Kansas City Chiefs is heading into week two, they will be facing the Philadelphia Eagles, who had the number one offensive line. Saying of this performance, left guard Landon Dickerson battled an injury during Philadelphia's Week 1 win over the Cowboys, which resulted in his exit. Backup Brett Toth handled the Eagles' final 11 offensive snaps in his place. Dickerson also had the lowest PFF overall grade among the team's offensive linemen at 51.5. The unit had an uncharacteristic game compared to past seasons, allowing 12 pressures, including one sack, on 34 pass plays. This was against the Cowboys, who were missing a very key piece from what it was they had last season. That culminated in an 80.9 PFF pass blocking efficiency rating, which ranked only 25th in the NFL in Week 1. Not low enough, however, apparently, to bump them off of this number one pedestal. The best player, Jordan Mailata's 93.5 PFF run blocking grade led all offensive linemen in week one. This is distressing for the Kansas City Chiefs, who did not have the most pressures in the world versus Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Did not get to Justin Herbert and the Chargers all that much. Still, I do think that the defense and the defensive line looked better than it did last season. That is a good Chargers team. They got 3 sacks. They got after the quarterback. There was more movement along the defensive line than I remember last year. So I think when we're looking at this Eagles-Chiefs rematch, we were very close to seeing both Super Bowl teams open the season with a loss. The Eagles were really not looking as they did last season versus the Cowboys, versus a Cowboys team that really didn't look all that impressive either, and didn't look all that impressive either last year. So when we are taking this into account, these two offensive lines, the offensive line for the Chiefs, the offensive line for the Eagles going into this game, the Eagles are right where you thought they would be. The Chiefs, however, are, I think, better than any of us expected them to be along that offensive line at this point in the season. I thought heading into week one, we were going to see more hiccups than we did along that left side of the line. There were 7 pressures. 7 of the 10 pressures came from that part of the line, that side of the line. But nothing was really disastrous. The one time that I think Kingsley got beat pretty bad was on the play where Mahomes scrambled and ended up hitting Hollywood way downfield. Now, if that pressure doesn't come into Patrick Mahomes' face like that, if he doesn't have to scramble as quickly as he did on that play, maybe that ends up being a touchdown versus what I believe ultimately became a field goal in that situation, right? So there are still some things to button up, but I think that the Chiefs' offensive line acquitted itself just fine in week one in a fashion that, in a form that we would not maybe have expected. If you had told me heading into that game that we would get that performance out of the line, I would have said probably the Kansas City Chiefs win that game. They did not, but it was not the fault of the offensive line. It was more a fault, I would say, of the defensive backs. Very light coverage, very unaggressive play. They sort of let wide receivers make the catch in front of them and then waited for the wide receiver to advance before deciding that the play was still on to go up and make the tackle. So I think, all things considered, the offensive line play heading into week two is ahead of where we would have thought. The thing with the defensive backs is that we have seen the Kansas City Chiefs defense operate this way in the past. A Steve Spagnuolo defense traditionally gets better as the season goes on. And maybe there are some steps to be made, but I think that we would have all taken most of those individual performances heading into week one. The defensive backs, probably not. The linebackers, maybe we would have asked for a little bit more. The defensive line, I think, compared to last season, you would hope for more, but you wouldn't expect it, right? We're going to have to see heading into week one, where's Xavier Worthy? Where is Omar Norman Lott? Where is Jalen Royals? And with the first video I posted today, we have some maybe distressing news on that front. That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. And if you find yourself here by chance from not design, the Chiefs are the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.